both the gospel and the first reading talks about the role of the shepherds of Christ, his apostles and his successors, those who will guide the church. And both ask the people who are, the presbyters are referred to by St. Peter, to lead God's people humbly, not with power, but with love and honesty. And then eventually God will take care of you, the leaders of the community. And of course, who's first? The one who is first must serve the rest. Okay, that's my job, to serve you. St. Callistus could be, the title of the homily could be From Slave to Pope, or it could be Patron of the Catacombs, Patron of the Dead, because that's what he was. Callistus was a slave, eventually freed and joined the church, and as a church member became a deacon. Deacon's job was to serve. Deacon's job in the scriptures and as they're anointed as deacons are to serve at the altar, the table, and the word. So they're privileged to preach and they're privileged to hand out the Eucharist in the early church. Diaconia means service. So Callistus took his role very seriously, and because of that, eventually he's martyred. But before he's martyred, he's known as a good man, a man of faith, a man who challenges the authorities of the pagans, and eventually he rises up in the hierarchy of the church. But as a deacon, when he becomes one, he's assigned by the Pope. This is like, he died in 222, so that we're going back, the early centuries of the church. He's assigned to take care of the places of the dead, what we call cemeteries. The cemeteries in ancient Rome were built underground, CATACOMB, okay, outside the walls. They weren't hiding places. People knew where they were. They were catacombs. They were cemeteries. And when someone died, they would bring the Christian to the cemetery. And a few years ago, I was privileged to be at St. Priscilla Cemetery. There are a lot of them, St. Priscilla and St. Callistus. St. Callistus is where we offered Mass. And the altar on which I offered Mass is called the altar of Santa Anna. I'm not going to say that's my dog's name, but it is my dog's name. So I was very moved to be honored to say Mass there. And whenever you offer Mass in the catacombs, you always wear red because of most of those people were martyred, but not all of them. The catacombs are very interesting. If you've seen pictures of them, they're meant to bury as many people as possible, and the belief is that we will rise again at the end of our existence, at the end of time. So they never cremated in the early church. There was no reason for that. They had room. Catacombe is outside the walls. Only the emperor could be buried inside the walls of ancient Rome. So the Jews had their catacombs, Christians had their catacombs, pagans had their catacombs. Not unusual. They were underground. The Callistus' catacombs, and he was guardian of them, are at least 7 miles, but they're not 7 miles long. There's 7 miles of area on a step level because they go down 5 stories underground. The earth was very accommodating. It's like a little history, but it's good to know our history as Christians, as Catholics. The earth is called tufa, and it's kind of clay that can be dug out easily, and if you pound it, it hardens. So it was very easy to make a hole in the wall to bury the dead. And what they did was they buried them in steps, okay? So slots, you might say. So they bury a person, they clear out the dirt, bury a person, and then put a stone over it to seal it. And the stone had the person's Christian name and a symbol of Christianity. That's where we get so many of the early Christian symbols of, like the orans, the praying priest, or the dove, or the key row. They're all on those stones. Now, the sad history is when the Vikings and pagans and Ostrogoths and Visigoths stormed Rome in later centuries, they destroyed them. and took out the bones and scattered them, they were all taken up by a pope in the 800s and buried in one church in Rome that's called the Church of All Saints. It was the Pantheon Church. It was the church with the big dome that's open. Okay, so it's the Church of All Saints. So, go back to the catacombs. So Callistus was the guardian of the catacombs, and he made sure that they were well organized and very easy to get to with a torch or a light. Now they're lit, but they weren't lit. And you could very easily get lost if you roam away from the group. Some of the catacombs were, like I said, in niches. Some of them were like little rooms, kind of like little chapels. And in those rooms, wealthier Christians were buried, and sometimes popes were buried. And there is one that's called the chapel of the 9 popes, because there are 9 popes buried there. So the ones that were like chapels were made into what we call arcosolia. They were dug into the wall, a round arch was built, dug out, and in the arch was beautiful frescoes of Christian teaching, sometimes the miracles of Christ. The great one is, the very familiar one is Jonah coming out of the mouth of the great fish. Of course, that's a symbol of resurrection. All of them has to do with resurrection. And then below that arcosolia was dug a hole, and the person's body was placed into that hole, and again covered with a stone. They probably celebrated Eucharist down there. Okay, it's not definite. They weren't built as churches, they were built as cemeteries. And what they would do is some of the places had outside little chairs, little benches, where they would have repasts, like we have after our funerals. We go, we eat. So the Christians did that too. But again, not only the Christians, all people who kept the custom of burying the dead would do that in the catacombs. St. Callistus took care of them, and like I said, the Mass that we celebrated was in the catacomb of St. Callistus. And when he died, he wasn't buried there. He was buried in a little chapel in Rome that he had organized. He had built this little chapel. He was built in the crypt of that chapel. That chapel today is called Santa Maria in Trastevere, one of the most beautiful ancient churches in Rome, mosaics that floor you, and it's built in a little piazza, a little fountain outside, but once you go in, it's just awesome. So Callistus is buried there. Now, I emphasize this because it's history, because we are a historical religion. We have history. We didn't just make it up out of the sky. We have people who built our church not by stone, but by faith. And those people, like Callistus, are great examples of being persistent in doing what's good. One of his theological contributions is very interesting. There was a movement in the early church, now this is really early, because like I said, he died in 222, that Christians who refused to, who agreed to worship the emperor were condemned, were thrown out of the church. If they repented, he welcomed them back. Well, there were many very, very, very conservative Christians that said, no. Once you're out, you're out. And he made it very clear, no, you do penance, you're welcome back into the church. And that's Christ-like. And so that's one of his main contributions. I say it in a few sentences, but that was a controversy that went on for a long time. But he stood his ground. Eventually, he becomes pope. He was a slave, and now he's a pope. So that's why a theme of his life could be from slave to pope. And as a pope, he led, again, the church in about 9 years. This is Pope St. Callistus I, and there were successors. So our church is built on the martyrs. Our church is built on our ancestors. And it's good to know that our church never had a period of everybody getting along and singing Kumbaya and, playing along on pretty flutes. There were controversies right from the beginning. There's controversy today in some aspects of the church, but that's all right. I mean, we're human. We got to realize that we're human. And in our humanity, we bring God into our lives to the best of our ability, as Callistus did. He was human. He had fights, not physical fights. Maybe he did, I don't know. But verbal fights with those who disagreed with him, and he won. So it's very important to realize that we have to stand up for what we believe as Christians within the church and outside the church. We have to stand up for what we believe as people in our country, Americans, and whether we come from different countries, as my ancestors did, and many of your ancestors did, but now here, we stand up for what we believe as Christian values. That's very important for us. Not unusual. Not everybody's going to love you because you're a Catholic, believe me. Some people, I always tell this story, when I first went on campus more than 30 years ago, I was campus minister. Sometimes I would wear a collar, sometimes I wouldn't. But when I wore the collar, I would get two reactions from the students. One is, hey, Father, who are you? Where are you from? Very open, whether they were Catholic or not, didn't really matter. But I always had a smile on, working with kids. And then some people would see you across the campus, and sometimes this is the faculty, they would see you across the campus and would go like this, like they don't see you, okay? It's all right. I got thick skin, and I think we all should have thick skin in reference to our faith. We are who we are. We should take no apologies for it. We are who we are, and we're here to represent Christ and bring Christ to one another, as Callistus did.